I'm here about HB 6364 that Senator Hwang and I both introduced, and just quickly, and then I'm going to turn it over to our Chief Canine Sergeant from the Fairfield Police Department, Hector Irizarry, who leads our 3 canines in Fairfield, to share a story about something that happened with one of our canines. But the purpose of this legislation is to allow our EMS and our EMS workers to be able to treat a canine dog if it's hurt during a situation that happens while they are on duty. So right now, our canine officers can treat their own animal. They have the ability to do that. But if they are alone at the scene and something happens to the animal, they can't leave the scene. So if they're in pursuit of a suspect, they can't leave the scene to take their animal to the veterinarian or treat the animal. So this would allow this extra layer of protection for canines in our state. And I also was contacted by the Department of Corrections, who said they would like to have their animals also included in this if we could move forward. I know that the Department of Health had some issues with it, and I'm sure there's a possibility us to work together to try to fix that language so that we could try to make a compromise. But I would like to turn it over to Sergeant Irizarry to just share some of his comments.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for having me here. I appreciate this opportunity to testify on behalf of the canines, the police canines in the state of Connecticut. I am a proud canine supervisor from the Fairfield Police Department. I oversee a 3 canine unit team. We have 3 canines assigned to our department. Last year, I was assigned Canine Jake, who is by far the best dog in the state. I'm not biased or anything, but we were doing a training exercise in Southport, Connecticut. And what we were doing is we were training for tracking. As you know, we use these dogs for many, many different purposes: narcotics, tracking, good and bad people. More good than bad, fortunately, in Fairfield, but that's because we have great leaders there. With that being said, Canine Jake was doing a tracking exercise. I know what that means. I'll make it short, trust me.
Yeah, it means your time's up, but take a moment to summarize if you would.
Absolutely. So Canine Jake was doing a tracking exercise, and we were out on an icy terrain in Southport, and he severed a major artery in his right leg. I noticed a huge amount of blood spurting out of his leg, and I picked Jake up, ran to the police car with him, bandaged him up as best as I could, and he was young at the time, so of course he was more interested in what I was doing with his leg than the actual pain he was probably suffering from. So I had to take Jake, throw him in the back of my police car, and loop the leash through the cage and hold it taut to the back of the cage as I'm driving lights and sirens from Fairfield to Norwalk Vet Hospital. How I made it through that drive, I mean, you know, we drive under high stress conditions numerous times a day, but I'm freaking out a little bit about my dog and him bleeding to death in the back seat of my police car as I'm trying to get to this emergency hospital as quickly and as safely as I could. Had I had some assistance from a paramedic or an ambulance where I could have placed Jake in the back of an ambulance, taking care of his wounds while we were driving, you know, we probably would have gotten there a lot safer than I did. And I just hope that this bill passes, because if anything, just the transport fact alone would be a tremendous asset to law enforcement canines. You know, luckily Jake recovered from his wound, and he's out there working now or waiting for me, and then we're going to go to work. But, you know, we just need some sort of assistance out there in the field. As you know, with the fentanyl crisis that's going on, our dogs, if they sniff that narcotic, they're in for a world of hurt. You know, we all carry Narcan, same Narcan that we use on humans. We carry it in our pockets in the event that our dogs become ill from inhaling or ingesting that that awful drug. So any assistance we could get from the medical community would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Thank you for your service. And thank you also for honoring the canines that do such great service for our communities. Appreciate it. Senator?
If I may just simply sum it up for you, I think first and foremost, we are addressing our K-9 law enforcement partners to treat them with the same degree of attention and afford the protection that they deserve. That being said, I think what's also important is the fact that perhaps not even legislatively for us to be able to look at perhaps the scope of responsibilities for EMS, because what Officer Irizarry just mentioned is the fact that right now the law prohibits our EMS to be able to transport law enforcement canines in their vehicles to get treatment. And perhaps this is an opportunity to explore a scope of change that doesn't require significant changes in our cost as well as our ability to provide these important things. But ultimately, I think it's an important conduit for us to make that transition. Canines are law enforcement officials, and we should treat them as such because they've become such an integral part of being able to help us stay safe in our community. So I appreciate the opportunity to be able to present this bill, and I welcome some conversations if any questions are from the committee. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any
Madam Chair.
Representative Claire Distria?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, the three of you, for your testimony. I think it's very important to take care of our canine companions and officers that put their lives on the line every day. And thank you for your service, and thank you for your canine service. My question, if this law was to pass and canines were able to go on the ambulance, would the handler have to go with them, or is this something they could transport on their own?
I would like to say that the handler would want to be with that canine because the canine's going to be probably going through some trauma and some shock, and he's going to feel most comfortable with the handler itself. So the handler would accompany the dog on the ambulance.
Okay, and then just another question with either liability of the ambulance or just the training of the paramedics and/or EMS to handle the canine.
I really can't comment on the liability side of it. All I'm looking for is just that transportation to get us safely to a vet hospital.
Okay,
And just to follow up with that, other states do this now. There's, I think, 5 states. There's no state that does dual, so there's no one state that allows transport and treatment. But I think we could work with the Department of Public Health on some compromise because they're talking about different levels of certification for EMTs, and that potentially not all EMTs are allowed to provide intravenous, which I think is something I think we can discuss because it's the same as a human. And I think anyone would need that level of care. If you potentially need intravenous treatment in an ambulance on your way to either a veterinarian or a hospital, I'm assuming that most EMTs would have someone at least on the ambulance that can perform that. So that's some of the things that the Department of Public Health's commissioner was talking about. But I was hoping that we could at least work with the commissioner on some language that would at least allow the transport.
And do you know how many states offer transport only right now?
I believe it's 5.
Anybody near us?
I'll check into that and I can get back to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your testimony.
And ultimately, I think it's important to include the EMS in this dialogue as a significant shareholder in this conversation. But I think the key is really this is a common sense approach to ensure that our law enforcement officials are protected, canine or human.
Representative Arnone?
So I did read several of the other states' law. I think New York was one. So there's also a priority list too, a human to dog priority list I think needs to be written into any law that goes forward because we obviously tie up an ambulance in a critical situation. There needs to be some kind of protocol for them to follow. So that's written in just about all the other bills. And some of the basic first aid was also a training issue that I think that can be overcome also for the most part, especially when it's tourniquets, just keeping the dog comfortable and safe for the transportation. So I think with a little more conversation, hopefully we could add to those states. Thank you.
Representative Jenga?
Chair. Thank you for your testimony, and you make an excellent point here about canines. March 13th is Canine Veterans Day. Will be celebrated. This will be the second celebration since Governor Malloy allowed this celebration. The military at one time thought about canines as just property and didn't treat them properly. Like in Vietnam, hundreds of dogs were left there. But now they're considered as part of the military. And I think you're asking for the same thing. But because of a situation that's happened in my town, you're not saying that paramedics cannot administer to the canines, are you? Does the law prohibit that?
Not yes.
I think at current, it is not within their scope of duties, nor is it within their scope right now to even transport the said animal. And I think that's an important part, as the testimony provided by the officer here. He literally had to put himself at risk to ensure that his partner. Now, you talk to officers that have a K-9 partner. These are partners in law enforcement. And when the good representative mentioned, would you go in the car? You sensed there was no hesitation whatsoever. You're there for your partner. You depend and you trust for your partner to protect you. And that's what we're talking about here, is that during the course of law enforcement, should a K-9 get injured, they should be afforded all the resources to ensure that they are safe, because they are doing it in the conduct of public safety.
I agree, but I was trying to ask you because we had a situation at East Hartford, and we have K-9s. And K-9 was sent in after a criminal knifed the K-9, and our paramedics did provide service.
Oh.
I don't know how it was transported. I doubt it was transported by an ambulance, probably was transported by the police, because they're going to follow what their best instincts are, just like you did. There's no question about these kinds. I just wanted to get to the law. And do we need not only the transport, because you say that is definitely not allowed, but the administration? Because there's no question the dogs are a part of the police force. I was out with the police and I saw them in action dealing with criminals, and felt pretty reassuring.
Yeah.
I think if you talk to law enforcement and you talk to EMS and all our terrific first responders, their first instinct is to appreciate that they come to the aid of any of their fellow first responders. And I think in the case that you saw right then and there, they weren't waiting for legislation. They were doing what was right. But
Common
we
sense.
raise the concern, if it's not codified in legislation, that opens up a liability as well as a scope of duty, and we want to respect that. And I'll let Officer Irizarry speak, because the relationship and the dynamic that he has with Jake is very special, and it's important for us to understand that we have to make the pivot. K-9 is a law enforcement official doing the jobs to protect the men and women of our community.
I agree with you, no question about it.
Yeah, Jake lives with me, so 24/7 we're together. We work anywhere from 8 to 16 hours a day together. He depends solely on me for feeding and training and so forth. So he has become a part of my life that I'm not willing to live without. So
Sure.
absolutely, we are dedicated to providing as much care as we can to our canines. And if this bill passed can help further that or create that conversation to move forward, then I would appreciate it.
Yeah, I agree with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Comey?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. You mentioned in the legislation, it says that you wanted to be able to carry and administer opioid antagonists. Is there any other medication that would be helpful when, that would be something you would want to administer?
Yeah, but what we were talking about
Right. I believe what Representative Kupchick was talking about is the Narcan being administered to the canine by EMS. Us as canine officers, like as I said before, we all carry Narcan on us, and we would, in a heartbeat, administer that same Narcan to the dog that we would as a human being to try to save his life. As far as any other treatment, I think just basic first aid, and in my personal experience, just some bandaging and tourniquets is what I needed at that time. If it was, something as tragic as a dog being stabbed, then anything that would help just treat and prevent any further damage until we could get that dog to a hospital would be quite beneficial. But outside of that, I don't see anything else.
Thank you.
And if I may add, it's important to get that scope of change because I can share a little brief story at the indulgence of the chair. It was 4.5 years ago that the opiate epidemic and the use of Narcan was brought to the forefront. And at that moment, 4.5 years ago, only paramedics could carry Narcan. And in working with the Commissioner of Public Health, I explored the fact that it'd be important to allow all of our first responders that are first at the scene, from police to fire, to be able to carry as part of their repertoire and tools to life savings and not wait for a paramedic that could only carry it. And what we did was, in working through public health, through the various governing boards and training, we were able to get within 6 months a change of scope that allow first responders to now carry Narcan. What has resulted in that is the fact that many, many lives are saved from their ability to carry Narcan. So I think it's not just simply lawmaking, but also to perhaps reevaluate a change of scope and duties that would allow us to protect and save our canine law officers as well.
Thank you, Senator. I was actually going to ask you, I mean, I'd love to know how you did that with the Department of Public Health, because, I mean, there are other scope of practice issues as far as life-saving medications. That would be great for police officers to carry, and for our other emergency responders to be able to carry, such as epinephrine. So I'd be interested in talking with you about how you did that. Thank you.
Absolutely, and it was a great credit to the Commissioner of Public Health at that moment, but also the first responders that offer insight in the practicalities of implementing the change of scope that we talked about. And we had paramedics offer support, because ultimately we were all of the same common goal, and that was to save lives. So absolutely, I'd be happy to share that with you. And again, I would ask for your support of this bill as we move it along, because again, I sound like a broken record, but I believe our canine law enforcement staff deserves every bit of support that we would give to humans as well. And I know there's been some controversies related to that, but if you understood the scope and the important work that they do, and you would never question it. So thank you.